Passion in Enterprise. For those who don't know me or haven't met me before, my name's Alex Till. I'm the Chief Executive of an organisation called MENTA, a not-for-profit organisation delivering enterprise support for far too many years since 1984, but working with a whole range of different entrepreneurs, individuals who have a passion around enterprise and look at how they can take their businesses forwards in so many different ways. Today, we're joined by James Brook and Foong, who are going to be talking to us about some of their experiences and their excitements. We're going to be looking at how, during this debate, we critically explore entrepreneurial passion and look at how that involves itself with where we take our businesses to, the risks we take, and those opportunities which we may glean. James is a leadership consultant, organisational psychologist, and an executive coach, and a proper legend from what I'm reading, which is quite exciting. And he's also the CEO of Plexus Leadership and TalentPredix. James is going to take us through a really good set of slides. He's promised me they are good, and start to investigate some of the research that he's undertaken. And then we're going to have Foong, who is the founder and CEO of impact startup Matchable. Previously a director at PwC and advising on structuring M&A deals. She also founded the blog suite and Pie and the Suits and Startups community. We have some fantastic people in front of us today, guys. Please don't be shy. If you want to ask questions as we move forward, pop those hands up or pop it in the chat, and we will get this debate and discussion going with some lively energy and some great opportunities to understand further some of the research James has undertaken. So, James, over to you, and let's get these slides on a roll.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for that very kind of energetic introduction, and very appropriate in the context of this discussion about passion in entrepreneurship. So just to kind of build on what Alex was saying, I suppose, I've been now an entrepreneur myself for around 20 years, but I'm also a researcher. I'm doing my PhD at the moment looking at passion in entrepreneurship. So if we could just have the first slide up. So let's just start off by looking at what is entrepreneurial passion. And people have different understandings when they think about passion. And you'll be pleased to hear that even researchers have very different kind of understandings of passion. But what I'm going to do is offer you what's probably the most commonly referred to definition of entrepreneurial passion by Carden et al. So you can see it there up on the slide. So consciously accessible, intense positive feelings experienced by engagement in entrepreneurial activities associated with roles that are meaningful and salient to the self-identity of the entrepreneur. That's a very long sentence, isn't it? But essentially, if we kind of break that down, it's really about the intense positive feelings that entrepreneurs have about specific activities or specific domains that they engage in to build out their venture. You'll notice from the definition that rather than being state-like, this is more kind of trait-like, more enduring kind of effective, effect or emotional feelings towards those activities. So, for example, I'll give you an example of myself. For instance, I'm very passionate about inventing and about founding. I'm less passionate about developing. So what does that mean? So it means that I really like to create. I'm creative. I like to get the venture going and that sort of thing. But then the interest and the passion dies a little bit in terms of the kind of the ongoing kind of development and the follow through. So that's what I know about myself. And that reflects, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs where they're passionate about one of those kind of particular domain areas rather than all of them. But if you look at the kind of the body of research, people can be passionate about a whole variety of things, entrepreneurs. They can be passionate about the social mission. They can be passionate about the purpose. They can be passionate about the customer. They can be passionate about the people who work for them and building the team and so on. So the research would suggest that actually there's a whole variety of different domain areas, not just the three you see on the slide there, the inventing, the founding and the developing. And it's passion is very distinct from intrinsic motivation, but also state-like positive emotions like enthusiasm or excitement. Because, of course, I can be enthusiastic about a particular activity or whatever the case may be or something. And then, within a few hours that enthusiasm dies down and I'll move on to other things. Or I can be excited about a particular presentation I'm giving, and then that excitement would die down. So that's different from passion, which is, as I say, more kind of enduring. Related to a specific activity that's associated with your self-identity. or your you know, your feelings of who you are at your best. It's also worthwhile looking at a different definition, which was put forward by Vallerand et al., that talked about the dualistic model of passion, and particularly obsessive versus harmonious passion. And essentially, I'll just give it to you in a nutshell. What Vallerand et al. Suggested and has found through research is that some people have a very integrated sense of passion, integrated in the sense that it actually kind of helps build out their kind of self-identity, and they've got volition or choice in terms of whether or not they want to pursue those particular activities. And that gives rise to harmonious passion, or passion that you know, is very much integrated in their whole life. And those people, the research find, they tend to be a lot happier, a lot more fulfilled, and are able to kind of thrive in their entrepreneurial careers, as opposed to the people who are more obsessive, where they feel pressure and their sense of passion is not fully integrated with their self-identity. It comes through pressure from outside or from internal pressure. And those people tend to burn out quicker. They tend to, as the word suggests, they tend to become obsessive about their involvement in the particular domain area or activity. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a sense in terms of what entrepreneurial passion is all about. Next slide, Ola. So in terms of my PhD research, and Foong in particular, I think is going to tell you more about the picture on the right-hand side there, an hour in the life of an entrepreneur. But I can tell you that entrepreneur feels like a roller coaster a lot of the time. It's got a lot of peaks and troughs, and those can happen kind of every single day because of the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the changeable nature of the entrepreneur, the multiple also roles that an entrepreneur has to fulfill, particularly when they're founding a business. Often they, you know, chief marketeer, they chief finance officer, they chief HR officer, they, you know, you name it, chief operations officer, everything else. Some of the limitations of entrepreneurial research into entrepreneurial passion to date are listed there on the slide. I'm not going to talk through all of them, but what I will say is there's been a very strong kind of focus, a positivist focus. So very heavy focus on quantitative research, cross-sectional studies, and so on, finding sort of causal relationships with outcomes. And of the 69 studies actually that have been done since the early 2000s, in fact 2004, over 80% are quantitative in nature. You know, that in itself is a significant kind of limitation, I think, in terms of the research, particularly given that not many are experimental and not many kind of involve any kind of you know, specific interventions or interventionist based studies. So there's that limitation. There's also a limitation in terms of there's no consensus of how to actually define and measure entrepreneurial passion, and how does it differ from some of these other constructs around self-efficacy and around motivation and kind of all these other, you know, grit, Angela Duckworth's grit, and all these other kind of constructs. So that I think is you know, needs more exploration. There's very differing views still in terms of whether it's a state or trait or a combination of those things. And then also there's been virtually no longitudinal research on how entrepreneurial passion is experienced and also how it fluctuates over time in response to all these changes that the entrepreneur experiences. And in fact, some researchers have called the entrepreneurial experience an extreme experience, an extreme emotional experience. Because of its nature, in the same way that, you know, becoming a kind of a top performing elite athlete would be an extreme emotional experience. There's intense highs, but there's also very intense lows, and often on the same day or even in the same hour, as Foong will probably relate to you. And then I just want to mention quickly that, you know, my research is a qualitative piece of research, longitudinal in nature, and I've tracked the entrepreneurial journey for a dozen or so entrepreneurs over an 12 to 18 month period. And I've essentially been inquiring with those entrepreneurs into first of all, what leads them to become kind of entrepreneurs, what are they particularly kind of passionate about in terms of those kind of different domain areas and different activities, And then how do they experience entrepreneurial passion over that period? And I'm finding that the way they experience a passion is very individual, and it's very kind of different across the individuals. And then last but not least, how do they make sense of that journey? And what role does entrepreneurial passion play in helping shape that venture for them? So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a kind of an insight in terms of entrepreneurial passion and the research that I've been doing.
James, that was fantastic. I was on mute then, so apologies, everybody. And we've got one question come up in the chat. What kind of measurement scorecards are being used, and are these self-identified emotions or feelings, etc.? As this is a fascinating topic. So are there any scorecards? Yeah,
so there's a variety. When the question talks about scorecards, but in terms of actual kind of measures of passion, entrepreneurial passion, there are a whole variety of measures of entrepreneurial passion out there. And most of them are self-report. So there is also a whole line of inquiry, a whole line of research into perceived passion, which is really interesting because they're looking at obviously kind of, you know, both the verbals, but also the non-verbals. And there are measurement scorecards in a way, or measures that actually measure how passionate somebody's coming across. And there's also been some quite interesting research, for instance, looking at, does that help entrepreneurs to get additional funding from venture capitalists when they're doing pitches, and I think the research suggests very mixed kind of outcomes in that regard. Generally kind of though more passionate people seem to get kind of more funding. That's what the research is suggesting. So it's quite interesting, that the whole kind of area of measurement.
That's superb. Thanks, James. And I think it's really interesting from what we were saying about people being very enthusiastic to actually being passionate. And one of the things in my head is, how long does that passion last? And if you're an entrepreneur in a business and you get that adrenaline, or you get that addiction to actually building the business and driving it forward, and you're feeling very, very passionate, when that passion starts to wane, what do we do? Where do we go? How do we see our way forward? And I think it's a really, really interesting space. So I'm going to bring in Foong, who is one of those people who has probably experienced so many different emotions during her journey into self-employment and the growth of certain businesses, that it would be really, really wonderful if we could hear from her on her life journey right now. So thank you, Foong.
Thank you. So please stop me at any point, because I can go on for a very long time. It's either I'm going on for a long time or not. But yeah, just to introduce myself. So I'm Foong. I'm the founder of a impact startup called Matchable. And I'll tell you a bit more about Matchable in a minute. But my background is actually, so I'm obviously Asian. I come from a very Oriental family. And just in the context of passion and entrepreneurship, what it is basically, I grew up in a family that was very traditional. So my parents always wanted me to become kind of like a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or a dentist or whatever. So I was actually a very good Asian kid, as it turns out, listened to my parents. So I ended up reading law. And then I joined the grad program because I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I then became an accountant. So I don't know if that was much better. But I was basically kind of sort of fulfilling my parents' wishes, as it were. I joined the grad scheme at PwC a long time ago, I won't say when, but I was there for 13 years, basically, kind of, sort of climbing up the corporate ladder. Really enjoyed it for the most part. I'm the kind of person who enjoys a challenge, and you'll probably you see that as an entrepreneur. Probably a lot of entrepreneurs like that. But in 2016, I made director, which is kind of like the level just below partner. And it was at that point where I started kind of questioning whether this was really what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And it turns out that advising on tax structuring for real estate and private equity funds was not my calling. So I had actually taken a sabbatical in 2018 to really try and find my purpose. So I'm very millennial as well. So really kind of finding the thing that really would drive me. And I knew it wasn't what I was currently doing, but I had no idea what it would be. So it's kind of that's kind of where I was back in 2018. At the same time, what was happening was an incubator had been started by 8 of the UK's largest charities, so included the British Red Cross and Water Aid and the RSPCA. They had all come together to try and find solutions to some of their collective problems. So they wanted to kind of start companies that they could invest in, but that also would really help them as charities. And one of the ideas they had was called Matchable, and it was actually about matching people who wanted to volunteer, who often ended up kind of painting fences and planting trees, which is really great and, you know, helpful for the charities, but not as impactful as it could be, because these people often had like very specific skill sets that the charities actually needed. So they had run a couple of test projects doing this skilled volunteer matching. And they had found it was a viable business idea. So they had actually put out an ad for a founder. And that's when I applied and I got the job, which is great. So I've been doing this for 3 years, since early 2019. One of the things, obviously, like, I could relate very much, I suppose, to what, you know, what Matchable, the idea of Matchable was, etc. But one of the things that really spoke to me, actually, as an individual, and feeds, I suppose, into this kind of passion piece, is actually I could very much relate to being in a big company, not finding my purpose, feeling like I wanted to do more. And that's why this particular idea really spoke to me. Like, I wanted to help other people who had been in companies, or who are in companies, find their purpose through Matchable projects. But obviously Matchable is about much more than that, making an impact, etc. But that was very much my my driver. So long story short, 3 years in now, I can talk a lot about the journey, and we can go into that if you'd like. First year, it was me on my own. It was very, very lonely. And it was really weird going from a company of 20,000 employees to just me. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and just be like, so what are we doing today? So that was the first year. Raised a bit of money in that first year from friends and family, sort of small round. Second year, COVID hit. I had a team of 4 then, and it was super fun, but a lot of pivoting. No idea really whether we had found product market fit. We hadn't. And then the third year, which was last year, we completed another round of funding at the beginning of the year, just under $500,000, which really allowed us mainly to hire a CTO. So we launched a new platform in September last year. And now we are a team of 10. We're growing 20% month on month. Hopefully that'll continue. Fundraising again. But yeah, it feels more like it's a business. Obviously, at the same time, we only have 6 months of runway, which is why I'm fundraising. So it's that constant kind of battle between, will there be a business in 6 months? And we're doing so great. It's a real company. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I could just go on for a really long time.
Foong, that's excellent. One thing I'd like to explore a little bit further there was, you were saying that when you started out as being a founder, you were very lonely. Okay, how did you overcome that loneliness? And actually, is it a passion thing, or is it a survival thing, which you were thinking of at that time, saying, I've taken on this role, where have I got to get this to? Because I agree with you, being in some large organizations and then going down to a business of one suddenly is a scary and daunting space. I've been there. It's crazy. And you just think, oh, should I just stay in bed? Or no, we've got to crack on and make this work. How was it for you?
It's very up and down, to be honest. Like, I have good days and bad days, obviously. I wrote a blog at the time. I think it was more during my sabbatical. But one of the things that I did really miss was actually just being able to show up somewhere where people were, that even if you, to be honest, didn't like all your colleagues, at least there were people there to talk to. And I think that companionship actually like plays such a big part in that. Because also I'm the kind of person, like, if I'm left to my own devices and with my own thoughts for a long time, I get quite stressed out and I kind of spiral a little bit into those. So you need those kinds of points of relief where you can speak to people. So what ended up happening was I would work a lot from coffee shops at the time, just to feel like there were other people around. I reconnected with a lot of people I just hadn't had time to speak to, when you're busy working in big corporate. But it feels inherently very lonely, because if you don't do anything, the business doesn't progress because it's all on you.
Yeah.
And also because there's no real roadmap as to, especially for a new idea, like how to build it. So it's very experimental, try new things, they may or may not work, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the Good Lab, the incubator that we came out of, actually was very helpful. They had kind of like set days you might go into an office and meet some advisors and things, and that was really helpful as well.
Super. We've had a great question come up. It says, entrepreneurial passion is great. And this is to both you and James. Entrepreneurial passion is great. Would it always have positive impacts? Could passion make the entrepreneurial blind, especially when a venture is not going in the right direction, i.e. being not able to see the challenges or issues, especially when to stop investing on a business if it doesn't deliver? Fantastic question, because some of us with entrepreneurial passion, I'll get the words out there, will actually hold on to things because we're not quitters. We want things to succeed, but sometimes we need to know when to withdraw. Anyway, give us your thoughts, Foong, James.
Yeah, there's definitely a dark side to entrepreneurial passion, and the research has gone into this to some extent, not deeply enough, but it's certainly looking at this kind of whole area. What happens when somebody becomes blinded by passion, and that impacts sort of more logical, rational decision making, and of course emotions, including entrepreneurial passion, impact our thought process, impact the way we kind of solve problems and so on. And I can think from my own kind of entrepreneurial journey, I've built several businesses and sold a business 3 years ago and so on, that definitely at times, because I am quite a passionate person, and that passion sometimes has resulted in poor choices and poor decision making along the way, and I could have made better and different decisions if I had sort of sat on it longer, and rather than thinking, well, this is the right thing to do, and I'm really kind of passionate about driving this business forward. I'm also quite a decisive person, so that probably doesn't help. I need to step back and I need to look at this in a more kind of logical, analytical way. So I think yes, I think it definitely has this dark side to it. Foong, what do you think based on your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a bit of a balancing act. Like I definitely, when I started out, like what Matchable looks like now is nothing like what I thought it would look like. In ways it's better, but it's also just something I just wouldn't have imagined. One example I'd probably give is, so during COVID, actually, we pivoted from being a B2B startup to B2C, because we thought that's where kind of maybe the money was. And eventually I do want to be able to offer Matchable to everyone. But what happened was, I think it was a combination of kind of that passion and wanting to, give more and more people access to Matchable, which was kind of that side of it. But what happened was actually the data, and we did a trial basically for 6 weeks with 60 people. And I actually personally was like, yeah, this is a thing, this could happen. We're getting so much great feedback from people signing up, on Instagram and stuff. We had these ads that just said, are you bored of Netflix? Sign up here, and maybe that was misleading, I don't know. But we had like thousands of people signing up to Matchable for, individuals. And because it was so much in line with where I thought the business should go, I was very much like, we should continue to do this. But what happened was actually, the data and my team were actually saying, look, based on actual facts, and what we're seeing is, although people are excited about it, they're not ready to pay for it. So actually, do you still want to continue with this strategy? And that was a point where it was kind of passion versus, listening to the team, looking at the data. And I think one of the things is actually getting that balance between you know, knowing where you're headed and, you know, having the vision, the long-term vision versus, but also being agile enough to actually kind of pivot around and, you know, make decisions based on data. If you need to, even if it is at the expense of your big vision, because actually maybe that's how your company survives. So I think it is a really fine balance, and I think it's really easy to get blinded by your passion, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and I think the other thing that I'd say just very quickly is that one of the learnings that I had is that because I'm passionate about that kind of early stage creative stuff and so on, I need a COO in the business really early. Somebody who's passionate about the developing of the business and the growing of the business and the scaling of the business, because that's not me. You know, that's not who I am naturally. You know, I'm very kind of passionate about those kind of, as I say, the inventing and the early founding. But then I get bored, and then my kind of passion dies. So it's a case of kind of, can I get somebody in who can complement me, who's passionate in areas that I'm not.
I think that's a really interesting point, James, looking at passion, looking at risk, and looking at your own skills base. And one of the other things I was going to pick up on is, what do you do if, as that passionate person within an organisation, others don't have your passion? How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Alex, and I'd love to hear Foong's view on this as well. But there's a contagion effect that I've certainly seen play out in businesses that I've run. So for example, the business that I built over kind of 13 years and sold, you know, we built that business to a big global community of people. So we had our sort of core team, and then we had a community of resellers and distributors and so on around the world. And I think that if I look back on that experience, one of the things that helped us build that community of, you know, resellers and advocates, and what was the passion? What was the fact that they could see that I was really passionate about not just the product and the platform that we built, but also the mission, you know, the kind of the overall kind of purpose and the mission. And I think that did definitely have this effect of being infectious, you know, kind of bringing others on board, bringing others in. So I think in that sense, it was incredibly powerful and helpful. I don't know, Foong, what about you?
Yeah, when I think about the team at the moment, I think definitely we recruit at kind of like the basic requirement is that people are passionate about the cause and what we are kind of aiming to do, for sure. I think, but like to the extent to which they are passionate about it, they're never going to be as passionate about it as the founders, definitely. I definitely agree there's like a contagion effect. But I think also the other thing that happens is to say, like, if like, you know, 100% is their commitment, like the percentage of their passion kind of can vary. Like maybe you have a minimum of 20-25%, and then the other things that you can give them to supplement that or boost it so they buy into the company, like obviously salary, to be honest, as a startup probably not, but like for sales, like commission, but also like a great working environment, giving them the flexibility to kind of like work when and where they want, you know, and also the team that you're creating, like that everyone has that same kind of those same values, and they're all on, you know, kind of working together to achieve something big. You know, all those little elements, I think, if you asked anyone in my team, they'd value all of it, but to different extents, maybe.
Okay, superb. Thanks, Foong. I'm going to pick on Charles right now, and he's going to go, oh, goodness me, Alex, are you? Charles, you work within the community a significant amount, and with many young people starting their own businesses and having not necessarily always the most positive of backgrounds, and a lot of those have passion. And I know you've been a strong figurehead for the happypreneur as well, in making sure that those entrepreneurs are happy. What are your experiences around young people, passion, and moving their business forward? And sorry to pick on you, Charles, not really that sorry, because I wanted you to come in, but let me know your thoughts.
You're breaking up, Alex. Sorry, you're breaking up.
I'm so not breaking up. Anyway,
no, you're quite right. I mean, I was actually thinking both in terms of both presentations, in terms it fits the young people that we work with, that tend to be from the most deprived communities, don't have any collateral, and actually the other side of it, they're passionate when they're with you, but they're not passionate at home or with their friends. And part of that, I think, is how we in this country have not embraced, and I still hate that word because it's French, entrepreneurialism, but we don't embrace it, because part of entrepreneurialism is you can fail, and by failing you will learn. And so sometimes it's actually very difficult, because they get very, very, very passionate, because they're so used to getting knocked back. As soon as you make a suggestion, well, have you thought about this? They actually feel that you're being negative. And so it's a very tight rope, you know, to go on. But you're quite right. It's the passion of the youngsters that keep them going. And if they didn't have that passion and able to explain it to us, then I don't know what a lot of them would do, whether they're people who are sofa surfing, whether the people who are recovering drug addicts, or haven't had much support at school or college, or suffer from neurodiversity, or whatever. In a simple answer, I wished I actually knew what the answer was, Alex.
That's fine. That's fine.
But I know one thing: if you're engaged as an advisor, if you're engaging with somebody, talk about your experience, and that way you can actually get that across. And if you can show that you have happy thoughts as well as negative thoughts, but the happy thoughts always take over, and at the end of the day, the most happiest thing about being your own boss is actually you've got nobody else to answer to, and that is a great reward in itself. I miss it, but my business went under, and you know, I had problems with my business partner, and I decided I didn't want to take that risk again, personally, for my family at that time. But with the youngsters, it's actually great, because they will say, well, why haven't you started up again? And I keep saying, because I want to pass on my experience to you, rather than me concentrating on running a business. But I'd certainly recommend A Happy Entrepreneur by Tony Robinson, OBE. It's entertaining, it's funny, and I appear in the index 3 times, so it can't be all that bad.
And he's not on royalties.
And he's not on royalties. No, he's not. It's one of those great things, but it is a good read. But the important thing about it's telling everybody who reads, if you really get into it, that only you yourself as running a business can make yourself happy. So what makes your business run well might not make you happy, so you might need to adapt. But as was said earlier, don't get carried away, because actually people might not want to buy what you're selling.
Yeah, but Alex, the thing that I love about what you're saying as well is that there's an ecosystem that you exist within. That we all exist within when we're starting our ventures and so on, and part of that is our personal network, and that personal network, I think, can be a generator of passion, you know, help you kind of with your passion, or it can actually steal your passion. I think that's also kind of so the personal kind of connections, I think they can either help you or hinder you, but also there's that whole ecosystem. And you know, it's quite interesting. There's quite a lot of research, for instance, that shows that in incubator, and Foong was talking about the incubator, you know, incubator type environments and so on, you know, that people kind of work off each other, and that sort of passion becomes kind of, you know, becomes quite self-reinforcing, and that gives people kind of energy to move forward, especially on the dark days, the difficult days. And all entrepreneurs, as we know, have those very difficult days.
It's interesting, James.
Yeah.
We run a co-working space, and one of the guys I was chatting to yesterday, quite new, early stage in his business, everything else, goes, I share my wins with everyone within here. He goes, I don't do that at home. I don't do that to myself. If I'm working on my own, I have no one to share my wins with. And I went, wow, Adam, that's an amazing thing to say. He goes, I share my wins with the people here, and they share their wins back again. And we have a community of people that share their experiences, their highs, their lows, their engagements, issues which they may have personally, where they're trying to deal with relationships in their business, which is also a big impact which we have to look at. And it's just really interesting to see where people get their support from in not your necessarily understood areas of work. So you may think, I've got a great support network. Actually, it's having a chat with someone in the co-working that makes you leapfrog some of those issues quite quickly and quite simply. We're getting a whole flurry of questions coming in, which is great. And I'm going to throw them out there. And by all means, guys, if you're out there and you've got more questions, please feed them in. We've got, have you found any links between background and or past experience and entrepreneurial passion? Really good question. Do our histories create our future? What do you think, guys?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the interesting sort of areas of inquiry that I'm exploring is people who have past founding experience. You know, so they founded multiple businesses, and I had a number of people in my sample who kind of founded several businesses, and I think that's been really interesting because the research would suggest that you know, people's kind of passion is quite enduring, and but I think they're able to kind of regulate that passion better. You know, when they've got that experience of having founded previous kind of businesses, and they're also clearer in terms of the specific domain areas and activities they're more passionate about, and how to maybe bring other people in. So I think that in itself, I think is kind of really interesting. What are your thoughts, Foong?
I don't know. I can't speak for all other founders, but I actually came off a call a bit earlier, or I'm part of this network called MSD UK, and it's Minority Supplier Diversity UK network. And they were actually talking about the fact that ethnic minority businesses tend to be actually more impact-driven, more impact-driven ultimately, and more diverse as well, just because of diverse backgrounds, I suppose, which is really interesting. Obviously, they get a bit less exposure, but yeah, I think definitely for me, I actually take a lot I learned a lot during my time in corporate, definitely in terms of past experience, but I also learned a lot of things around how I didn't want to do things. So I use that to, you know, to kind of inform how I build the company going forward, and culture and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the research would suggest that there are a variety of different sort of personal factors, you know, that do influence how you experience entrepreneurial passion, the extent of that passion. I mean, it was quite interesting because one person in my sample, for example, you know, his only passion seemed to be to kind of make money and sell the business, to exit the business. And that was a bit strange for me, as somebody who's grown my own businesses, and those businesses have generally been kind of values-based, purpose-based businesses. Clearly, you know, it's nice to make good money at the end of the day, and I exited 3 years ago and made good money. But at the same time, you know, my businesses were always kind of this purpose-based business. I really struggled a little bit just to kind of connect with this individual and what his kind of sense of kind of passion was directed at, which was very much about, you know, I want to make money and sell this business. And I could be doing a variety of different businesses. It doesn't matter, you know, what business I do, as long as I sell it and I make money. So we've got to recognize and appreciate there's all these different sort of people out there with different motivations, different intentions when they're starting a business. And certainly in the tech digital space, Foong and I will know a lot of people who are starting businesses to sell in 5 years' time and just make a lot of money.
And it's becoming even more prevalent, James, in some respects, because it then creates a lifestyle, which is what those individuals are trying to achieve. We've got another question. Do you see passion as being synonymous with drive? And where does resilience, grit, determination, etc. come in? Also, where do you see growth mindset fit in or not? Is that just a given? Another really, really good, difficult question.
Yeah, big question. I'll try and so with grit, I'm fascinated by grit, and grit is one of my kind of side kind of interests, if you want. I'm not really kind of bringing it in a big way to the PhD, but Angela Duckworth, who kind of initially conceptualized grit, she basically said essentially it's the combination of passion and perseverance. So it's really about being passionate about something and focusing on something for the long term in order to kind of achieve a desired outcome, a desirable outcome. So that's really what grit is. And therefore, there's a very strong overlap between kind of, you know, grit and passion, certainly in terms of the kind of the sort of passion element that Angela Duckworth talks about, because it's very similar to kind of Card and Edell's work around passion. In terms of learning mindset, growth mindset, I think that's really interesting because, and this is something that's coming out of my research, that people who seem to do well in terms of coping with setbacks and failure, and that's not everyone, but they seem to have a kind of growth mindset, which is that I can learn something from this. I can bounce back and learn something, and it's not going to undermine my passion and my commitment to, the end goal and the journey. And so I'm seeing quite a lot of, and I'd love to hear Foong's kind of thoughts about that. So a lot of these entrepreneurs I've been talking to, I mean, they've had huge setbacks. I remember my biggest setback was when I found out from our business partner that we weren't going to be able to fund payroll, and the business was like about 8 years in. We were doing incredibly well, and it was just a cash flow issue. We had some bad debt. It was a cash flow issue, and I thought, hell, and I had a whole lot of sleepless nights. And eventually we had to go to the bank, cap in hand, and say, can we have a whole lot of money? And they were gracious enough to give us that kind of, that overdraft kind of extension. We got that money. But yeah, Foong, what about your kind of thoughts and own experiences?
I think I definitely agree with kind of the passion plus perseverance. I think is so important, just generally, not just in entrepreneurship, obviously, like in life, so grit generally, but yeah, I think they really do have to go hand in hand in order to progress any kind of business. Because I think for me, so I was saying this to James the other day, my mom always says, she compared me to my ex, actually, in fact. But she said he's kind of he's in a little fishbowl on a sun lounger, like sipping a cocktail, and she was like, but in your fishbowl there's always a shark, and that shark's coming after you, so you're constantly like kind of trying to like run away. Anyway, I don't know if that landed at all, but the whole point of it is actually there's something, and I don't know, it is, obviously I believe very much in what I'm doing with Matchable, and there's like a purpose there, but I don't feel like the passion sometimes is necessarily enough to get you up in the morning and make you do things. And I think you do need a bit of that kind of shark in your fishbowl kind of attitude, like, okay, yeah, today is difficult, but I'm going to get through today, and I need to get up and just do this. And I don't know where the shark came from. It probably is my mom, actually, as an Asian like dragon mom. But there's something there that I think you do need to combine in order to kind of make things happen. In terms of growth mindset, I think it's also really important. I think that's kind of just in terms of along the journey, just being adaptable and learning from everything that you do, but also creating an environment where I think Charles was saying, like failure is not a bad thing. Like, actually, we tried something and, it didn't work. So actually, let's try something else that might work and see what sticks. And I think you do have to have that as a team, like not just one person, so that everyone feels happy to contribute ideas and to kind of, keep innovating. And the thing that we say at Matchable is very much like, I'm a first-time founder, so I've never grown a business like this. None of my team have grown a business like this, so everyone's ideas are just as valid as anyone else's. Like, so, just throw them in the ring and we'll kind of see what happens, really.
Superb. Thanks, Foong. It's really good just to get the two sides of this, a theoretical and actually a lived experience. We've got a couple more questions. We're probably going to have to pause after these. We've got one. It says, I've often wondered if there is a difference between passion for entrepreneurship as a construct and the passion that is shown for specific ventures, especially amongst serial entrepreneurs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because. Yeah, I mean, I think some people have a passion for inventing and founding, and they recognize that, that's what they love. A little bit like me. I mean, I love to do that. And I've got so many kind of ideas and so many ventures that I want to kind of build. And I think, you've got two choices. One is that either you actually kind of just create lots of ventures, or alternatively, you create a kind of a Y Combinator type organization where you invest in a lot of ventures and you support them and you mentor them or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I think the passion is different from somebody, for example, who wants to kind of build one venture and then sort of take it right through and to kind of long-term kind of growth and development and so on. So that would be my view. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, James. That's excellent. And I'm going to bring in the last question, which sounds like it should have been a title of one of my MBA assignments. Would you regard passion as a cognitive, psychological, or social mechanism of entrepreneurship? Please discuss.
Oh, I think it's such a Thanos. I think that's such a wonderful question. It's such a wonderful question. So passion is very much a kind of within the emotional or kind of affective domain, but I think it has implications across kind of the cognitive, certainly the problem solving, across the social. And I think it's a two-way relationship, because I think the venture, and this is one thing I'm looking at, which I think is really interesting. I think the venture and the people around the venture, the ecosystem that Charles was kind of referring to earlier, I think that and your friends and your family and everything else, that kind of impacts on your passion and the fluctuations of your passion and the way that the passion is manifest and so on. So I think probably it's kind of the interrelationship, the interplay between those. In terms of what your passion ultimately kind of, looks like and how it evolves over the course of your venture or ventures.
Thanks, James. Foong, anything you'd like to add to that one?
I'm not even sure I understand the question, so I'm not going to attempt it. I'm sorry, Thanos.
It made me smart, because I suddenly think, would you regard passion as a cognitive, psychological, or social? All of it. In every single sphere. As an early stage startup, that is absolutely every piece. I've got to get in there and be passionate with all the people within the social environment. In the psychological, I've got to keep my own passion alive, and I've got to run with it. And you know what? I've got to keep that whole cognitive space going, because actually, there is imposter syndrome, there is highs, there are lows. James, I've been with you with the cash flow. I didn't get paid for a couple of months to make sure the staff were. So all of those sorts of things are there, which on an everyday basis you're trying to juggle in your mind. And actually keeping that passion alive is probably the addiction of the small business owner. It's quite an interesting debate I had once, in terms of someone saying, do you get up at 4:30 in the morning? Are you constantly stressed? Do you not engage with your family? Are you not sure whether or not your staff understand where you're headed? Yeah, that's not a mental health issue. That's the reality of running a small business, because that's the lifestyle and the choices we take. And no disrespect to any mental health related programs out there whatsoever, but that is the life of a small business owner. And you're either passionate about it and it's part of your life, or you're not. And it's those struggles which many of us bounce back from and think, yeah, we've got the scars, staffing and cash flow, 4:30 in the morning, we're there, we understand it. And it's those things for me which actually breed even more passion around those who are in the same environment. And that once again brings that co-working, that coexistence, and spaces to perform as well, if I'm honest. So, James, Foong, any final words?
Boom.
Oh, okay, me.
That was a great pass, James. That was a great.
Yeah, I think for me, definitely passion. I know you're talking about people who just kind of start companies to make money, and I think I'm just personally, I could never be one of those people. I think it's very much about picking something that I really care about enough that I want to make a difference. And that idea of being able to leave a mark, making this big change, is really what drives me, plus the shark, obviously. But I think that's definitely, so for me, passion, is really important when you're starting a startup. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about that. That's my conclusion on that topic.
Thanks. James, anything to add?
Yeah, I think what I would say it's such an important topic, because if you look at all the kind of research, the quant research, which has all its limitations in terms of methodologies used and so on, but still, what it's suggesting is that entrepreneurial passion is so important for a lot of really positive outcomes in terms of the health and well-being of the entrepreneur, which is really important. I, for example, spoke to Tech Nation, and they said that's one of the things that's most important to entrepreneurs, health and well-being. It's important in terms of entrepreneurial passion for performance of the actual venture. It's important for fundraising. It's important for creating and commercializing, great products, for innovation, for building an effective team. It's so important across such a wide variety of outcomes that really we need to understand it better. It's in its infancy. The research only really started, certainly this sort of research on entrepreneurial passion started around 2004. So we're still early days, and there's still a lot to learn. And hopefully I can contribute to the kind of the body of knowledge. We can all contribute to the debate and the knowledge and the learning in this kind of area, so that some policymakers and educators and everyone else can kind of incorporate it into programs and policies and strategies for entrepreneurship moving forward.
Superb. Thanks, James. I'm going to draw it to a close now. We've got about 5 minutes to go, but I'd like to say a massive thank you to you both for sharing your insights, your knowledge and your enthusiasm and passion around the subject today. Also, a massive thank you to the Centre for Innovation Management Research. And I'd like to just leave on 3 things. I often look at my businesses around life, love and legacy. If I want it to be passionate in my life, I keep it there. If I want to love it, I will make sure that we are constantly in love with the business and don't fall out of it. And I need to leave something behind, whether that be of social value or to those staff which I work with. So from my perspective, life, love and legacy, and passionate people do powerful things. And I just want to leave on that note, because I believe they do, whether or not be for good or for bad or for their business purposes or for social purposes. I'd like to thank Charles for being picked out there, and I'd like to thank every single person who attended the event for their time, and also for all of the most amazing questions which we've raised.